All right. I think it's time to start. It's 5 o'clock here in Brisbane. 3 o'clock, 4:30, 3 in Manila, 2 in Jakarta, 2:30 in New Delhi, 4:30 in South Australia. So I think it's time to start. Welcome all. This is another event from the ERRN in joint event with International IDEA. We are talking today, we're presenting the report Managing Natural Hazards and Climate Risk. We're taking a focus on elections and in the Asia Pacific. My name is Ferran Martinez Icoma. I'm one of the editors or authors of the report, along with Deliver Yogi Saket. Sarah is around, so Sarah Birch, welcome as well from London, and it's an early time, so especially welcome. Before we start and before I introduce everybody, allow me to acknowledge the people who are the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I am in Brisbane, so that's a land of the Yugarabul, Yugera, Jagera, and Turrbal peoples, and I'm talking to you from Mogil. Mogil turns out to be a neighborhood, but it comes from Mogul allegedly, and it's the land of the water lizards. Now I can tell you, I mean, we're soaked by rain. I haven't seen any lizard in the last 2 weeks, but I've seen a lot of kangaroos. So for what it's worth, welcome from this little piece of land, which is an amazing area. We're very excited at the ERRN today and jointly with IDEA. When we talked with Tom about this event, he was already sold, so it wasn't too much. It didn't take too much of convincing. This book we've been editing, working with Sarah and Eric. Took a long time because, as you can see, guys, there are a lot of cases. Today we're going to be talking about the cases of India, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and for that we will have what else best than the author. So we will have Saket, we will have Yogi, we have Telibert. Sorry for commenting to as commenters, we have Wina Gira from the Philippines and no less Tom Rogers that most of you already know. I will read two-liners, Yogi, Saket, Wina, Telibert, Tom, Tom. Understand that I'm not going to read all their CVs because otherwise we will be here for a long time. So Saket has worked as a consultant with the Election Commission of India and as a program manager at the International Institute of Democracy and Election Management for over 7 years. And unsurprisingly, he's the author of the India chapter. Yogi Setia Permana is researcher at the Research Center for Politics, National Research and Innovation in Brin, Indonesia, and holds a PhD from Leiden University. Delibert has been the author of the Philippines, and he first observed an election in 1994. Now, Delibert, this doesn't say anything about your age. It may say something about mine. I was young at that time. His first elections observed were in South Africa with the UN, with the United Nations. In the period of Nelson Mandela won the presidency, so has a bunch of experience, and he has observed elections in many countries as capacity as executive directions of NAMFREL. For those of you, it's the Philippines National Citizen Movement for Free Elections, and a very close friend of mine has worked with your organization, Telibert, Max Ramping, for quite a while, and has great admiration. Now, Wina Guerra is an associate professor from political science at the University of the Philippines in Cebu and convener of the Urban Studies program of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, and she got her PhD from Nagoya University. Now, and finally, we have both Wina and Tom will be the commenters of the 3 chapters. Tom was the former Australian Electoral Commissioner. He served for 10 years, from 2014 to 2024, the longest tenure ever in the AAC. As you are very much aware, AAC is highly professionalized. And Tom, for what is worth as a user of your data, thank you. Now, I am Ferran. I am a professor at the School of Government at Griffith University, and I'm also the ERRN Queensland convener. So the rules of today, the rules of engagement is going to be, we're going to give 10 minutes to each presenter. I will be quite brutal with the time because I also want Wina, Tom, and you, audience, to participate after Wina and Tom's. So we're going to be 10 minutes each. Yogi, you will start, or as we agreed, and then we'll move to Saket and Liberty. If that's okay. Perfect. Then Wina will make her comments, as so will Tom. You will only see me here giving the time. So now, Yogi, without any further ado, just the floor is yours.
Hello, yeah, sorry, good afternoon in Indonesia and good, uh, it is very nice to get the invitation to share with you all. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Ferran and Paula from ERN to organize this event. So I'd like to start with my PowerPoint. So, in the chapter book that published by International IDEA, I wrote about what happens in Indonesia election in 2020. Why I chose that because it is kind of showing the intertwine, between the flooding, hydrometeorological risk, and also the COVID. So we say it's kind of compound hazard. So, because in the 2020 election, some of the Indonesian district and cities suffering not only because of the COVID, but also with the flooding. So I compare some cities that showing how this hazard, either COVID and also flooding influence the electoral practice. But then from the case studies, it shows that there is a governance gap here because COVID-19. So the national bodies that arrange for the election have regulated how the electoral practice within the COVID context. COVID was anticipated through national regulation and formal protocols. However, flooding, by contrast, was handled mainly through local discretion, and this created a governance gap in electoral risk management. So, as you can see in the picture, I compare how the national regulation embrace the hazard. In the left side is a COVID, and right side is flooding. So, with the COVID, there was kind of a specific regulation for the electoral management bodies how to how to arrange the election, how to prepare the logistic and so on and so forth, and also there's kind of protocols about health and so on and so forth. But then when when they suffer with a flooding, there is no equivalent national electoral regulation, no detailed flood contingency framework, and no systematic emergency logistic procedure. So this gap could was became a quite institutional problem that also influenced the integrity of the electoral result. Yeah, so why contingency framework matters? I said in the previous slide, there was kind of governance gap because without a national framework, flood response become uneven. The risk mapping depends on local initiative. The relocation decision of the vote ballots place depend on local discretion, and the coordination among the state agency who respond to the disaster is not systematic, and end up the field officers carry the operational burden, and voters may experience unequal access to polling station. So I'd like to just only to say that flooding is make create that it's not only a logistical problem, but also it is an electoral integrity problem. National contingency framework will not eliminate flooding, but it would clarify who does what, when polling stations should be moved, how voters should be informed, how logistics should be protected, and when follow-up voting or partial postponement should be applied. And yeah, this key point came up from my case study that I did in one of the city in north coast of Java that now suffer with the tidal flooding and river flooding at once in the rainy season. And the flooding affected four sub district, and on election day there were 51 polling stations were affected by flooding. Flood water inundated access roads and waiting areas, and water level reached around 15 until 20 centimeter. And then the local official did some adaptation, like move polling stations to safer or higher location, protected ballots and election logistic with plastic bag, adjusted voting and counting arrangement, and use local knowledge to keep voting accessible. So in Demak, the flood directly affected polling station, voter access, election logistics, and the working condition on frontline election officers. But then the election continued, but largely because the improvisation of local official, because there is no national contingency framework that can be followed by the frontline officer. So different with the COVID protocol. And also, I compare. I did my second case in Semarang. It's kind of a city near from Demak, also in north coast of Java. This is the capital of Central Java province. But unlike Demak, flooding was less central to the election day operations. The main challenge was maintaining voter participation and public confidence. The local election bodies relied heavily on online voter education, digital public communication, public awareness videos, and anti-hoax and misinformation prevention, because this is the context of much more urbanized than Demak. So I'd like to discuss about the hidden cost of this local resilience. Um, yes, when we gain the data from Demak case, it shows that the local adaptation worked, but it had costs. Frontline election workers operated in very difficult flood conditions. Some lack adequate equipment, including proper footwear, and officers had to protect ballots, BBN polling sites. Some worked until dawn before the election day, and resilience depended heavily on personal commitment and improvisation. And I think that electoral resilience should be designed institutionally, not left to the sacrifice of frontline workers. The election did not fail, but its success relied heavily on local officials absorbing the risk. This is why stronger institutional support is crucial. Local resilience is important, but it shouldn't replace national preparedness. And then, because the chapter also invite me to revise or revisit to make a new update, so I conducted a study that focused on 2024 election, and turns out that the problem still continued. There is no still national contingency framework that applied uh, to embrace the flooding, because in 2024 the election also conducted in the rainy seasons. So flooding again affected local election in several regions, and the issue now in 2024 moved beyond logistics and became part of electoral dispute, because the losing parties do not want to approve or acknowledge the election result. As we can see from the two cities in Binjai and Medan, those cities located in North Sumatra province. So in Binjai, the plaintiffs argued that flooding hindered floater mobility, and some polling stations were submerged or difficult to access. Turnout reportedly declined from 71% in 2020 to 60%. and follow-up voting arrangement were considered uneven. So I think this is pretty much be concern here, because when the COVID happened in 2020 and now the COVID disappeared, but in 2024 the voter turnout declining quite significantly just because of the flooding. And also in Medan, flooding affected 9 sub-districts. Follow-up voting was held in 56 polling stations. Communication about changes was considered inadequate by some candidates and voters, and turnout declined. So the key message is like this afterward is because it shows that the issue did not end in 2020. Now in Indonesia, still in 2024, flooding became a legal and political issue. This confirms that disaster preparedness is directly connected to electoral integrity. 1 minute. Okay. So lessons from Indonesia. So natural hazard must be firmly incorporated into electoral law, electoral risk management, and national contingency planning, because the Indonesian case showing that first, develop a national electoral contingency framework for natural hazard is very important. And secondly, integrate electoral management with disaster risk governance. And three, clarify legal authority for partial postponement and follow-up voting. And fourth, protect frontline election workers and voters. And fifth, the last one, treat natural hazard as electoral integrity risk. So I will stop here. I'm sorry, Ferran, if I pass the time. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Yogi. I'm including the link already for the report, so it can be printed and it can be downloaded and read. Saket, it's your turn now, please. So we're moving to the India case. That would be great.
Yep. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Farhan. Thank you so much for this opportunity. We wrote the paper on for International Idea on Natural Hazards and Elections in India, and this was the paper that has been published by International. I think it's not visible here, but they published it. As we speak, it's 38 degrees temperature. There's a heat wave in India. Yesterday at 4 p.m., the temperature was close to 43 degrees. So I think we are natural hazards and continuous heat waves, while the south is facing other issues as well. Starting off, I think this is the paper mostly covered institutional context of what India's elections process means, adaptive measures, exploring strategies adopted by Election Commission to safeguard elections against natural hazards. These are adaptation measures. The next are providing assured minimum facilities during elections, which are mitigation measures, and then the environmental effect. Basically, things that the Election Commission has identified, like plastic bans, green elections, electronic voting machines, etc. This is just the basic framework of how elections are conducted in India. What is important to realize is that the disaster management, there is some resilience mechanism at the national level. There is nothing at the state level, and it is individually handled, sort of more depending upon the area, depending upon the district, depending upon the state, and how things progress. Mostly, the disaster management related work is handled by the district election officers, because they are the primary ones who manage the election as well. So this is their duty in most cases. In order to run a smooth and fair election, the electoral risk management strategies involved during elections in India have sort of transformed over a period of time. Initially, there were absolutely no contingency measured, and now we have come to a place where we are looking at developing backup emergency plans. And this has been primarily kicked in with what is called as the National Disaster Relief Management Agency, which is NDMA, and then there are the state-wide branches as well as the local district branches of the National Disaster Management Authority of India, and these work in tandem with the state election officials, the district election officials, as well as the national election officials. This includes some amount of training for the personnel, proper communication system in cases of massive disasters, which India is very, very highly prone to, and there have been some mechanisms that are in place in an organized structure, and does also include infrastructure and facilities in case of for voters as well as for election officials. Three very specific things that we had looked at. I'm sorry, my face is somehow visible in this. The three very specific things we looked at during the case study was the case of Bihar, which is one of the states of India, which was flooded during COVID. So the flood happened in September, and the election was in November 2020. And I looked at that case study, and there was a huge number of issues involved in bringing the voters to the polling stations, as well as managing the flood affected areas on how to bring people to vote. And one of the interesting elements that Election Commission in India regularly uses is to create what is called as auxiliary polling stations, which is basically smaller polling stations in areas which are affected by any issue, any specific issue, which could be law and order, it could be flood, it could be natural disaster, anything. So they created multiple smaller polling stations in smaller communities and created more staff, brought in more staff to help them to vote during elections, so that the process was much more smoother. The other case was Himachal Pradesh, which is another state. In 2022. They worked with the State Disaster Management Authority and created their own election-related plan, because the state is extremely prone to landslides, floods, and snow as well during elections. So these are some of the adaptation strategies that have been identified by various state bodies, although there are some national plans as well, but these are something that, depending upon the situation, localization of the natural disasters and how the election system is sort of responding to those issues. These are some of the adaptation strategies that are on a national level. This is now a given during Indian elections because of extreme heat. Apart from some areas, most of the country faces heat. And in 2024, when the national election was held, India was going through a severe heat wave again. And these are some of the support that is provided to elections, to voters as well as election officials during the elections. These are called assured minimum facilities. These includes medical kits, toilets, heating, drinking water, preventing health-related issues. This time they included fans, mist fans, and air coolers, etc., in polling stations as well. Some of the eco-friendly election practices that Election Commission has identified would include, of course, the electronic voting machines and GPS fitted truck for movement of the voting machines, so that there is transparency in the movement of election on the voting machines at all times. However, obviously it's only partial reduction of carbon emission, because while you're saving trees, you are definitely there is carbon emission due to excessive vehicle use, excessive use of batteries, etc. There are other issues as well. These are some of the milestone and ban of single-use plastics, which we had identified during the process, during the case study. These includes various advisories starting from 1999, amendment of rules, and now definite and most complete ban on use of plastics during elections. These include ban on campaign material that is made out of plastics, single-use plastics, and instructions to all political parties on not using single-use plastics during elections. These are some, as I've already discussed, some of these waste management issues, plastic-free campaign, eco-friendly advisories, campaign material bans that are non-biodegradable, model polling stations to reduce waste. All of these elements have definitely been brought in by India in elections to identify ways to sort of promote eco-friendly measures. There was another case during COVID-19, because when the elections were held, there was definitely an issue of biomedical waste management, and that was very effectively managed by some of the states, where they would collect waste from polling booths within 2 hours of post-poll, and a lot of the state bodies were very active in managing this very effectively. Vehicles used for waste disposal were tracked using mobile apps in different states as well. And these were usually masks, gloves, face shields, hand sanitizers, etc. I think some of the important elements of what lessons being learned from elections in India is that there is definitely a place where we are looking at managing the natural hazards. There are mitigation, adaptation, various mechanisms of dealing with this situation. However, there is no plan that is all-encompassing, and as Yogi very effectively pointed out, that this needs to be a central part of the election risk management work, as well as the compromise. Despite all these efforts during the 2024 national elections, 33 election officials died due to heat strokes and other causes. So this is definitely at the risk of the life of election officials. And there were discussions by the National Election Commission on moving the national elections from the summer periods to other points in time. But obviously, it will need a huge political commitment, including for mitigation and adaptation measures for electoral risk management during natural hazards and floods, cyclones, etc., etc. So yeah, I mean, that would be my bit here.
Thank you, Saket. That's been precise. Lentas with the talent, spot on. Thanks very much. That's been very, very insightful. Deliver, we're gonna give you the floor now for the Philippines. And as before, I'm gonna put the link again so you can access Saket's chapter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Farron, and thank you, Paula. On behalf of the team that's my co-authors, I'd like to thank International IDEA too for allowing us to contribute to the body of knowledge on election administration as regards climate change. So Philippines, first off, voters, we are 69 million voters, 1.2 million of which are dispersed throughout the world. They have 70 polling stations or posts where they cast their vote. But the huge number, of course, is in country. We look at 93,000 polling stations, over 370,000 poll workers. Now, elections are synchronized. It's in our constitution that we vote in one go. Half of the Senate, members of the Senate, there are 24 members. Every 3 years, we vote for 12 of them. And then we also vote for members of Congress, district representatives, provincial and city municipal officials, all in one go, as I've said. So we're looking at 18,000 positions, over 45,000 to 50,000 candidates. But of course, the voters will not vote for all of them. They vote for positions in their respective locations. When we vote, we use paper ballot, but machines will count our ballots. The administrator of the elections, of course, is the Commission on Elections. It's a constitutionally mandated body. And I will go to a bit of detail on their powers because it impacts on the way they're handling heat-related or climate-related issues as regards elections. On the left-hand side, you will see the ballot, how it looks like. When we vote, we just shade the name of the candidate and then feed it into a machine. Then the vote is recorded and not yet transmitted. I mentioned this because we're looking at equipment and how the equipment should be made ready subject to heat and water conditions. The same way as in India and in Indonesia, there are places where we saw rain and floods, and for the most part, we saw a dry season. But again, local conditions, those close to the body of water are experiencing different climates. They call it microclimate. For the elections in 2025, voter registration is all year round. We register anytime. The voter registration period is suspended as the election close to election periods, but then it again continues throughout the year. Now, this has relatively small, if not at all, impact on climate, because of course the voter will have to choose when he or she will go to the Commission on Elections to register. Now, registration is mostly online, but you have to go to the election officer office so that your biometric information can be captured and stored. Elections are 90 days campaign period for national positions. In the case of 2025 elections, which we refer to as a midterm elections because we don't elect the position of president and vice president. The senators had a 90-day campaign period starting in February and ending on May 10 with a one-day silence period before the voting started on May 12. Campaign for other positions, provincial, local, are 45 days. They began in March 28. The average temperatures during that period from February all the way to a few days after May 12, voting day, range from 35 to 39, average of 32. However, the heat indices were a bit high in some places, up to 42 to 46 degrees, and this is actually the wet bulb temperature, right? So it's temperature and humidity altogether, you have the wet bulb temperature. On record, that year, 2025, election year, we had the longest and most intense heat wave ever experienced. So in our study, we picked 10 provinces with the highest recorded temperatures. We looked at the averages, and we looked at the standard deviation of the temperature. So we chose this 10 provinces, and then we also included Metro Manila because it is highly urban and about 40 million voters, a population there. Now we interviewed election officials from the province of Bulacan, Pangasinan, and Metro Manila. So that's how we got our information to support our research. What was the impact of the heat wave? As I said, voter registration, not much, if any. And then campaigning, of course, the candidates adjusted how and when they campaign. Essentially, no campaigning from like 10 up to about 3, but it picked up in the evening and during the end of the day. Now, voter information sheets, I'd like to emphasize on this one. Voter information sheets are where votes are distributed to all voters. They contain of course, the polling station, the polling place and the polling station, the candidates who are running, and other piece of information that is important to the voter, how to use the vote counting machine and how to mark the ballot. So this one in our interviews had an impact. Heat had an impact on because this has to be distributed to all voters, and voters have to sign off when they receive them. So distribution could not wait until the day cools. It had to go all day long. And the election officers or officials saw that some did not, they had an issue of distribution because there were no contractors. So they had to access local village officials to help them in the distribution. On election day on the run-up, health protection became a central concern. Of course, first aid and other equipment were made available, and the Commission on Elections reached out to local governments to provide them water stations and then cooling fans and other support mechanisms to get the elections going. Now, elections are polling centers are public schools, so people know where to find them, except that the public schools are not really also set up for comfort, not even during when they're used to teach, also much less for election use. Now, turnout remains strong despite the heat. The turnout for 2025 was at 83% and the highest of all the previous midterm elections. So we did in our study did not create an impact at all temperature. There's a photo of the voter information sheet. I'll skip that. So how did the COMELEC deal with these issues? Because they're a constitutional body, they enjoy certain authorities and conditions that other departments of government do not. Fiscal autonomy is one, but essentially they are able to deputize any and all agencies of government in pursuit of credible elections. So they get the military to help them transport the ballots. Public school officials or teachers actually are the primary personnel for administering elections. The National Disaster Management and many other instrumentalities of government can be summoned by the Electoral Commission to help. So it's a critical mandate, because it essentially allows the Commission on Elections to do whatever they think is necessary, and in this case, and future moving forward, anticipate issues relating to climate. What conclusions have we based on our studies? Similarly to the previous presenters, we believe that it's important to institutionalize climate adaptation. Extreme heat, embed extreme heat risk management with deputized agencies, so that it is not just the Commission on Elections that trigger the preparation, but also like the Department of Education, so that they can prepare the schools better. In our recommendation, we saw what India does during the hot season, right? Painting the roofs white will help bring down temperature. And essentially, we told the Department of Education this, and the response to me was, we are going to send this to our infrastructure unit and consider it. Standardize health and safety measures at polling places, and then specify for equipment, vote counting machines, so that they are, even from the crafting of the terms of reference in the bidding, they're already embedding temperature resilience in the contract. And then continue register anywhere. Our election commission, as I've said, you register anywhere. They go to schools to encourage the youth, the in-school youth to register. We can register at shopping malls, and we can also vote at shopping malls. So this is really the authority of the Commission on Elections. Our laws mandate that voting will be held in public buildings. But the COMELEC, because of that, I would say, overarching authority, has considered and has implemented voting in shopping malls, especially for seniors and pregnant women and others who need that kind of comfort as they vote. So, and they will continue, as far as we know, they will continue to do so. So all in all, in conclusion, awareness is there, but nothing has yet been done in terms of institutionalizing it. Just like the other presenters, local election officers are able to use the mandate of the Electoral Commission so that they can summon different local instrumentalities of government to help them manage elections. All from me, Ferran. Thank you.
Excellent, Deliver. Thanks very much. Appreciate the present also, just into the time. Fantastic. Wina, now we're going to give you the floor. Thanks very much. So, floor is yours.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be able to share insights in this important discourse. I'd like to begin by extending my warmest congratulations to the authors and editors of the newly released book, and the important contributions of International IDEA in continually advancing democratic reforms and strengthening electoral institutions, particularly for the Global South. Listening to the presentations of Yogi for the case of Indonesia, Saket for the case of India, and Tilibert for Philippines, we are reminded that at a time when climate hazards are increasingly shaping the environments in which elections take place, climate and disaster resilience must be viewed not only as an environmental imperative, but also as a democratic one. The climate change and the increasing severity of hazards such as typhoons, floods, landslides, extreme heat, and drought have become electoral governance challenges, as these increasingly intersect with electoral processes affecting everything from voter registration and campaign activities to election day operations and post-election processes. Climate hazards damage physical electoral infrastructure, they displace voters, disrupt logistics, and strain already limited state capacities, and challenge the ability of election management bodies to conduct credible elections. Clearly, climate adaptation needs to be institutionalized as it becomes inseparable from electoral preparedness. Election management bodies are therefore compelled to consider climate resilience as a core component of electoral administration rather than an ancillary concern. As Yogi argued, contingency framework matters, and Saket emphasized the imperative for eco-friendly elections. The core message is not lost on me. that safeguarding electoral integrity in the 21st century increasingly requires adapting democratic institutions to conditions of climate uncertainty. Coming from the Philippines, I'd like to build on the argument of Tilibar when he emphasized, especially in his paper, along with his authors or co-authors, that safeguarding electoral integrity in a warming world requires expanding the definition of, quote, credible elections to include physical safety, health protection, and climate resilience. I completely agree. The Philippines is among the Southeast Asian countries that have invested the most in disaster risk reduction. For example, we have introduced scientific tools to track weather disturbances and in identifying vulnerable and high-risk areas to mitigate disruptions during elections. But as Stilibert has emphasized, in as much as there is demonstrated institutional resilience by Philippine electoral authorities, existing risk management frameworks continue to be limited in a way we have not yet systematically integrated heat-specific hazards, as most contingency planning continues to prioritize floods, security threats, or technology failures, leaving health-related and temperature-sensitive risks under-addressed. I'll perhaps add that more still could be done to address the threats at the intersection of conflict and climate change. The Philippines is still dealing with the effects of long-standing armed conflicts, a separatist struggle in Mindanao, and a nationwide communist insurgency. Conflict over land has been a constant in the country, and climate-induced pressures, especially in the context of extreme heat and drought, magnify these tensions and intensify land disputes in Mindanao's Bangsamoro region. The International Crisis Group produced data that both the periods of increased rainfall and droughts have coincided with an uptick of violence in central Mindanao. They also presented anecdotal evidence suggesting that in some instances, the poor Moros, mostly farmers, have joined an armed group or clan militia to compensate for losing their livelihood. This contributes to a highly contentious politics in the country's south, potentially straining a fragile peace deal and severely disrupting elections in an area beset by decades of rebellion and communal conflicts. Violent conflicts and natural hazards also tend to harm the poorest the most and make it difficult for disadvantaged people to exercise meaningful political participation. Rural women, for instance, are disproportionately affected by hazards. Given that climate-induced calamities seem to hit women particularly hard, gender-responsive electoral planning is a must. Electoral bodies should also do more to ensure the rights of the country's indigenous communities and take inspiration from their customary traditions. In fact, the papers reminded us that climate-induced and natural disasters create asymmetries in political participation by disproportionately affecting marginalized communities, rural populations, informal settlers, and internally displaced persons. So in this sense, climate hazards can generate new forms of electoral inequality that remain largely invisible within conventional assessments of election quality. So what affirmative electoral policies can be designed for the most vulnerable to this intersection? And for countries which are disaster-prone and have fragile democracies, such as the Philippines and Indonesia, and maybe India, the implications extend beyond electoral administration. The question is, what happens to democratic accountability when elections occur in communities repeatedly affected by climate-related disasters? Certainly, disasters do not merely affect the technical conduct of elections. They also shape the political and social conditions under which citizens make democratic choices. In disaster-affected communities, citizens often become heavily dependent on humanitarian relief and government assistance. In the Philippine context, many voters place significant value on the provision of immediate aid, or we call ayuda, during times of crisis. In contexts where survival and recovery depend on access to state resources, citizens may understandably prioritize access to assistance over broader concerns about institutional accountability or long-term government performance. Disaster assistance can become a powerful political resource conducive to populist political performances, and incumbents often enjoy greater visibility during relief efforts while vulnerable communities may become more susceptible to political appeals tied to the distribution of aid. In many cases, humanitarian assistance may be incorporated into existing patronage networks and clientelistic mobilizations, reinforcing political dependencies rather than strengthening democratic accountability. So this dynamic points to an imperative for understanding how recurring climate hazards may create conditions that compromise credibility of electoral outcomes. In the sense, the challenge posed by climate change is not simply whether elections can be conducted cleanly, safely, and peacefully during disasters. The deeper question is whether democratic accountability itself can be sustained when citizens are forced to navigate political choices under conditions of heightened vulnerability and dependence. So, building upon the important foundation laid by the current works, I look forward to further discourses and stock-taking on what shall constitute credible elections and electoral integrity, which also examine how climate disasters reshape political incentives, alter accountability relationships, and influence the broader quality of democratic governance. What institutional and electoral reforms might be designed so electoral bodies can implement robust measures to mitigate the weaponization of disasters and public relief for political advantage. In conclusion, I guess by understanding these wider political consequences, can we fully appreciate the implications of climate change for democratic resilience. Climate adaptation, after all, is not merely about protecting infrastructure for electoral management. It is also about protecting the democratic relationships of accountability that give elections their meaning. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Wina. Sorry, put the mic on, and thanks because I think you raised very relevant questions. I think we all agree. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. Can you hear me very clearly when I'm speaking? Thank you. And when you first said to me, "Do you mind going last?" I thought initially, well, that's great because I can then make a whole range of new points and portray myself as very knowledgeable. But of course, I've just come at the end of some fantastic presentations where some very clever people have covered the field very well. So with that as a backdrop, I thought that the whole panel, including Lena, worked really well together. Rather than revisit that in detail, I thought what I might do is to try and draw out what, for me, seems to be the central contribution as the panel as a whole, which is exactly what Weta just did before. And the common message that I take from the panel, and indeed from the work that's being done by International IDEA, is that climate change and natural hazards are forcing election management bodies to actually rethink the definition of electoral resilience. And this is a critical step for all of us. So, I speak as a practitioner. Historically, hazards sat at the very edge of election planning. They've always been important, but they were treated as exceptional. And what all the papers suggest is that the assumption is becoming a lot harder to maintain, that these are just not exceptional things. The practical and conceptual shift, I think, is going from asking, hey, what do we do if something goes wrong, to how do we design our electoral systems on the assumption that disruption is going to occur? And that's a very demanding question, particularly for election management bodies, particularly with issues of resourcing and legislative reach as well. But I do think it captures the significance of the work that we've heard today from the presenters. So, Farhan, if it helps, I thought I might make maybe some observations, maybe 4 observations, and then drag it together. And I will absolutely stick within the time frame. So the first observation is what we've just said. Climate disruption, it's no longer peripheral. It's a systems core level challenge. And if I think about my own experience of this, we had a huge drought in Australia around 2019 and 20. And sort of at the end of that, we had huge fires, bushfires through large parts of Australia, a large loss of life, incredible loss of property. And only a few months after that, as Commissioner, we were running a very significant by-election. We had to make a number of decisions, not just with the planning of that, but the aftermath, about how we dealt with the grief in those communities. As you know, Australia has compulsory voting, and after every election, we follow up and issue non-voter notices. And we made the, I think, very reasonable decision not to follow up any non-voter action in any of those communities that have been affected by that natural hazard, because you're dealing with grief and people that you want to win over with trust in democracy and not try and punish them for that. So that example for me mattered because it showed that hazards don't simply affect polling places or election day logistics, they actually affect communities, which I think is what each of the presenters have been saying today. It also impacts institutional routines and the broader electoral environment. So my second observation, I think, is that resilience, and we've seen from the presented, is as much about trust as it is about operations. When election officials, and I'm one of those, thinks about natural hazards, the first question is about, can polling places open? Can we get staff to work? Can materials be delivered? Can votes be counted? And all of that's absolutely critical. But that operational disruption is only one part of it. Natural hazards create uncertainty, and Weena's example of areas undergoing other forms of disruption I thought was great with that. Uncertainty creates rumours, rumours create distrust, and in my experience, voters are pretty understanding when things go wrong, but they do not tolerate silence, confusion, or inconsistent messaging, and that has to be wrapped into the operation. And I think it leads to a broader point that sits just below the surface of the papers that were presented. You know, what are we dealing with here? Are we talking about emergency logistics or with a problem of democratic legitimacy under stress? And I think what the presenters showed today is the answer is both. It's not simply an election that becomes hard to administer. It's that public confidence erodes if institutions can't adapt to worsening conditions. And it was great to hear Saket talk about adaptation strategies and assured minimum facilities, which is, I think, is a great way of dealing with that. My third observation, just quickly, is that electoral resilience is increasingly a systems issue rather than just an electoral commission issue. And I really worry about sometimes electoral commissions taking too much on themselves, that it's their responsibility to solve everything when they have limited resources. They do depend on infrastructure that election administrators don't control: electricity, transport networks. I think we were talking before about schools. You can have really great plans in place and capable staff and still face really big issues if these dependencies fail. So the resilience needs to be understood. And I think at a system level, commissioners, senior executive planners, they need visibility of all of those risks before a crisis. They need to have done that planning beforehand. And I was really struck by the discussion of heat and the planning about heat. That's a real issue for all of us, notwithstanding, what we discussed early on about flooding with Yogi and the fact that there's you must have plans in place before those things occur to ensure the adequate turnout and democracy. For me, as Commissioner, one of the best things I think I did is establish, it's a history-making thing in Australia, a high-tech command and control centre to run every election with access to live data from emergency services around Australia. So we could plot live polling places, the impact of fires, floods, natural hazards, and prepare plans for those well in advance and monitor what was going on a place-by-place basis. That was an incredible investment by government, but it did take the Commission to win over government to make that happen. My final observation, I think, is the ultimate test of resilience is democratic inclusion, which each of the speakers have spoken about, and Weena, I think, really brought that home as well. Generally speaking, hazards don't affect everybody equally. The communities that are most affected, they already face other barriers in any case. They're remote communities, First Nations communities, older voters, voters with a disability, and communities with weaker infrastructure. And that's why climate resilience isn't simply an environmental issue. It's actually a democratic issue about democratic inclusion. So I think the real test isn't whether an election can be conducted under ideal conditions. It's whether participation, accessibility, and public confidence can be maintained when those circumstances are far from ideal. And just, if I can also thank International IDEA and ERRN for the work they're doing in this space. I think previously we used to talk about climate resilience, democratic resilience, and national security as separate domains. It's very clear they're all merging together. and we need to treat them as one, not separate issues. So for me, I think all the papers made a very compelling case, and Wena's commentary was also very good, that these are real issues that we need to be prepared for before going into the event. And if I might finish with one quote from Yogi, which I thought was excellent, it was, don't leave it to local officials to absorb the risk. That is not a recipe for success. Thanks, Varun.
No, thanks, Tom. That's very insightful. I have to say, well, for me, those are very extremely useful 4 points, as well as winners, which I thought her presentation was also brilliant. Deliver Saket, Yogi had to leave. Sorry, he messaged me privately. He had another commitment, another appointment. But I agree that, the 4 points that you have raised, Tom, also, and some of them were overlapping with winners, right? Especially the democratic inclusion point, but also like this is happening. When I love the idea of the interaction of conflict, which also echoes Tom's point in the end of national defense, if you want to call it like that, or national security or whatnot. I think, obviously we could do this about me and I could just start asking questions to you guys and we could spend hours. However, unfortunately, this is not only about me. No, just kidding. This is also about the public. And, now on, if you guys would like to participate, I think we have a terrific lineup of speakers. So if somebody wants to participate, please raise your hand or put it in the chat or let me know. We'll make it happen. But yeah, like that would be good because of the topics. If not, if you're shy, I'm very happy to take the lead here. But while I cannot see at this moment anything, I have a hand. Sorry. So then, thank you, Sarah. Oh well, Sarah, I'm allowing you to talk, Sarah. Maybe so you may try to put your excellent. Go ahead, please.
Fantastic, great. These were absolutely fascinating presentations and I learned a lot. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Yogi made about the governance gap. And he talked about something that was also raised by some of the other speakers, but the coordination problems within the electoral management body and also coordination problems across agencies, between the electoral management body and other agencies. And this is in the context of a compound hazard with health crisis plus a meteorological crisis. But of course, there are other types of compound hazards that we also face. Rita mentioned conflict being combined with meteorological problems. And as the climate changes, we're going to have more of these compound hazards. And so my question for the speakers is, do we need a different model of coordination across agencies and within electoral management bodies? So it's not the local electoral officials that are picking up the problems, as Tom said, that really is not where it should land, on the local electoral officials. And if we do need a different model of coordination, what would that look like? Thank you.
Perhaps let's do it. Let's reply in pairs, Saket and Telibert, if you want, and then Win and Tom, because I think you also raised a point. So Saket, maybe first.
Yeah, what it would look like is something I'm not too sure, but I think this is definitely required, because I think from the Indian experience, I can say that the Disaster Management Authority, which looks after all the possible natural hazards that happen in India, is increasingly now collaborating with the Election Commission, because the Election Commission is noticing that these are issues that are coming up again and again. However, it remains at the state level. The National Election Commission has put out a standardized electoral risk management manual, but because these areas where there are specific issues which could lead to natural disasters are more organized and are more coordinated in developing these systems where they could tie up with the disaster management and develop systems and structures in such a way that it does not fall absolutely on the local person, it is in the interest of those particular states which are prone to disaster. So I think they are more aware and are more organized in these things, whereas nationally, I think there are still some gaps left. And I agree with you. We need a more organized structure where there's detailed interagency coordination. Those coordination exist on other areas during elections, especially in India, when it comes to law and order or others. So multiple agencies, for example, if there is bribery or other things, the tax officials get involved. So there is a structured system in trying to coordinate with different agencies, but when it comes to disaster management, electoral risk related to natural disasters, this is far lower than one would ideally want in a situation like this. So, what it would look like is something that I'm not too sure about, but definitely this is already there. This is coming up, and it would be, I feel that it was go much beyond the states going forward as the heat waves are continuous in India and go on increasing.
Deliver.
Certainly, it calls for a different model of coordination. I will use the word subsidiarity. We cannot, it's too much to demand for our electoral management body to be weather predictors too. So what plays here locally, it's really the local the microclimate I'm looking at. In an archipelago like ours, you see really same province, different conditions, right? So the coordination, in my view, should, while COMELEC as the overarching authority, it should be good at making sure that the different agencies that they are getting to support elections are able to do their work. So the National Meteorological Agency is not nationwide. There has to be some level of being able to define what kind of conditions are we going to face, and allow, like in the case of Bulacan where we had an interview, the fire department, the Philippine Coast Guard, because they were expecting flooding and some areas are actually flooded throughout the year, to get them to be involved. So this is very local. Now, it's really how COMELEC can be efficient in its access to government expertise. The other tricky thing that I'm seeing is these are all local, and you essentially get the local government to get to be in the picture, either to help in the preparation and also provide the locally available resources. So it's a bit tricky because they are going to be elected, their positions are up for grabs, but then you get them to be involved in the election administration somehow.
Thank you, Deliver. Win and then Tom.
Maybe just adding briefly to what Deliver said, I completely resonate with the dilemma that he mentions, like how do we actually insulate the electoral process from the local structures which are highly politicized. But indeed, as Tom has raised, it is a systemic whole of government issue, right? And since I've raised the context of the indigenous communities, the representation of women, and all these disproportionate impact by disaster, I think there is really this involvement, even, for example, the Philippine Commission on Women and the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, in terms of ensuring those more affirmative policies. So indeed, I would say that we need to redesign the intergovernmental coordination for electoral management processes. However, I say that with a caveat that we can't even really get the basics right yet. So I'd like to raise the caveat of, adding, in fact, more agencies might even further complicate those issues, in addressing this fragmentation. So that is probably just something that we have to really be careful about. Thank you.
Fran, I might just quickly
Yeah.
jump in.
Yes, of
Look,
course.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think I'll just contextualize my comment about electoral commissions and their responsibility, because when I was a kid, I used to live across from a railway track, and they had a big switching yard, where trains, the tracks move. And to control those, they used to have this big switching room with all these manual levers, and there might have been 100 of those levers. And I used to think at election time that everybody thought the Electoral Commission controlled all 100 of the levers that were responsible for an election, and maybe they only had their hands on 20, but there was this assumption that they did everything. And so it's important for us to work out where these responsibilities actually lie. And I think that Saket said some of these arrangements already exist in law enforcement, where there are multiple agencies that come together. In Australia, we solved the issue. I think we solved the issue of communications and mis and disinformation through a thing called the Electoral Integrity Assurance Task Force, where every agency that even had a vague responsibility for this came together to support the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission has started driving that process for climate as well with emergency response, but more needs to be done. And I understand that if we create more bodies, that could create more issues, but I do think there is scope for more involvement of other agencies in that issue, like we do in those law enforcement problems. It's a great question, Sarah. Thank you.
Can I, since there's nobody answering or raising the hand, can I push you a little bit, because it links with that? Tom, you mentioned before that there was a little bit of when you put in place this emergency, and in the last of the 4 points in the democratic inclusion, you also mentioned that you had to work your personal relation, like convincing the government in order to invest, in order to get that, right? And so here, and in a sense, I also hear Wina saying, well, if you put more organizations, it can create a problem of by default, right? And we all agree, just even arithmetically, that it's more likely that problems surge, right? So the question, in a sense, for me is how much or how important is, and I know the question may sound a little bit banal, but like relevant or individuals' relationships up to which point are so fundamental in order to convince the other side that what you're doing is important, or that this is relevant. And what was before, right? This doesn't only fall into the Electoral Commission on the one hand, or as was mentioned before, or just to the local officials. So here I think we find it is hard to find the balance sometimes, right? I mean, it's because and assuming also, like, apologies for that, assuming that the Electoral Commission is an independent body, truly independent, as
yes,
right. So how to take it for them when on those places where I'm the government and I may call, let's assume Wina is the commissioner, and I call her and I say, hello Wina, let's have a chat. So how do we do that? I mean, how could be this push forward?
If I might answer first, I know the others will have very sophisticated answers.
But
for me, part of that was actually quantifying the risk for government. So governments don't want problems. They've had enough problems. They don't want you to create problems. And quite often they make assumptions. And just out of interest, that bit about the command centre, we had a visit in 2016 by the head of state for Australia, the Governor General. And he came into my office and he said, I'm really excited to be here, Tom, because I've heard you give these speeches about elections being the most complex peacetime logistic event in the life of the nation. And he said, I can't wait to see your command centre. Now, just why that was important. He's ex-military. He was the ex-head of the Defence Force. And he said, I'm really excited by this. And I said, well, it's fantastic, Your Excellency. You're in it. And he said, no. I mean, like the big room with the machines that go bing and people and maps and stuff going on. I said, no, it's that phone, my staff officer outside, a few other people. Anyway, he was horrified. And we had already been speaking to government about this issue, that running these things is a risky business already, even without climate change. And so it was about continually reminding people of the risk and eventually saying to government, look, at the next event, if there's a failure, I have told you that I think this is a problem. You have not helped us. And so when it fails, here's what we're doing. I know you don't make many friends doing that, but I think it's important to put the risk where it needs to be, because it really makes people alive. And once we did that, then all of a sudden we had a command centre and support. And so, I know you don't get to do that all the time. You only get to do that once or twice before someone thinks you're a very problematic person. But that was such a big issue for us and really helped us. So there's that balance. But maintaining independence is the critical bit with that. you can never have the bit about we'll do that for you if you do this for us and all the rest of the stuff. It's just, here's a problem that we need to solve. Thanks.
Any
Baron?
other one? Yes, please.
Tom, I'd like thanks for that. I'd like to pick up on the quantification of the risk. So looking at it from the perspective of election management body, when do they flex? In the case of the Philippines, they flex when turnout is low. Complaints, right? Machine-related complaints relating to possibly questionable results, and then failure of elections. So it's failure of elections in our law is essentially a polling station level decision. But it could be security, it could be weather, so they flex. So I'd like to put that forward by way of, and I know that IDEA has a great election risk management model, right? So put that so that the commission itself, Philippines, really protects those parameters, integrity, so that they really campaign on those bases. I want to see turnout good. I want to make sure that people are able to vote and all that.
Good. No, thanks for that.
Yeah,
I have a question for you, Saket.
Yeah, I just read the question. Yeah.
Okay.
So your question is, India has developed numerous adaptation measures, but do we have evidence that these interventions actually improve electoral outcomes, such as turnout, voter access, or public trust? How would you evaluate their effectiveness? So yeah, I mean, including in the case study that I wrote, there is definitely evidence of these interventions improving outcomes. Like if you talk about turnout in Bihar, as I've written in the case study. So in Bihar in 2020, the elections was held in November 2020, and this was the first elections during COVID. There was flood in September, followed by, because it was going on during COVID, it was the first election, and a very large electorate. I mean, it was very difficult for the election commission to organize this election. And due to COVID, Bihar is one of the poorer states of India, and a lot of people work as labor in different parts of the country. They all came back to Bihar due to lack of jobs during COVID. So re-registration for them, bringing them to the polling stations, identifying new polling stations because of floods, creating new areas for polling stations, all of these, and then flood relief and other measures that were already going on just before the elections. All of this complicated the electoral process quite a bit for the Election Commission. Despite this, the voter turnout in Bihar elections improved over the past election by almost 3%. So there's definitely evidence of improvement of voter turnout. The other thing about voter access is as you know, I talked about assured minimum facilities. The assured minimum facilities have definitely improved voter, with voter access due to voter turnout as well, because most of the national elections are held during summers in India. And because of extreme heat, the assured minimum facilities provide elections are usually held in polling stations, which are generally schools. So it's easier for the Election Commission to work with the school, the Department of School and Department of School and Education, and work with them. And usually schools have access to most of the facilities, including water, toilets, the Election Commission also provides shade, other facilities, coolers, air, mist fans, etc. So over a period of time, the people have started expecting these facilities, because this is going on for almost 10 years now. So they've started expecting this. However, when it comes to public trust, there are other issues with the Election Commission, which are not related to adaptation measures. But when it comes to these issues, for sure, I mean, the Election Commission is definitely working hard on improving these. In fact, in 2019, the state election, they postponed the election in Odisha because of an oncoming cyclone. So they are more alive to the issues than they were previously, for sure. But then there are other issues which are not related to this. Yeah, sure.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Saket. It was somebody with my name asking the question, so that's clear. Thanks for that. All right, I don't have any hand here, and it's mindful about the time. So if that's all right, I'll give you like a last round for Weena, Taliber, Saket, and Tom, last minute each, and then we say our goodbyes. So Weena, perhaps you want to go first? Concluding remarks, basically.
Actually, I'm learning a lot from this discourse, and I'm just listening to the presentations. But yes, certainly, like what always keeps coming to my mind is really about the accountability of the Electoral Commission and management bodies themselves. I mean, Tillibert is here, and we are no stranger to the kind of public cynicism that our people have with regards to our electoral processes. You know, we have the Hilo Garci, the one that you demonstrated, Ferran. It actually happened, right? And so it was, and it was like out in public for the country to witness. And so the kind of distrust and public cynicism is there. And the thing is, we are the most disaster-prone country in the world. Problem with that is it almost become a norm that people don't even, you know, like sort of see it as a not see it as a problem, but people move on, right? And this kind of normalization of this disaster, and we are known to be resilient in the way we, you know, not build better, but in terms of forgiving and tolerating the kind of corruption that is right before our eyes. And so there are certainly a lot of questions that are raised from this discourse, especially for the Philippines. And thank you for this opportunity to take part.
Thanks, Farron. Thanks very much, Weena, Tom, Saket, and Yogi. My quick takeaway here is that climate certainly stresses or gets us to think differently about democratic representation, electoral resilience, efficiency in election administration. And I'd like to look at it as a foundational, if not a driver for introducing other changes in the elections. We as election, advocates for improvements in the electoral process, certainly climate will push the Electoral Commission and even the other stakeholders to think differently. The key point here, and I'm learning from the others as well, is that the focus becomes more on the voter if you look at the climate. So we hope we can shift that attention to voter focus, more voter focus, so that, of course, democratic resilience will follow. Of course, I'm looking at how voters can really change the quality of the campaign. And also, I hope to ride on climate as a driver, a foundation for changes that we want to see.
Thanks, Taliber. Saket, and then we close with Tom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Farhan, for this opportunity, as well as thanks to the panel, such an august panel. It was hearing Tom Rogers is an absolute delight. So much to learn from what he has pointed out. I mean, I think in terms of elections, conduct of elections going forward, I mean, India is very prone to disasters and heat waves in particular, and a lot more needs to be done. And I think the more the more of these interactions are held, and the more one sort of interacts with the Election Commission, we will try. I mean, we are working very hard on trying to push them to sort of look at this as a national issue and try and work on these issues so that we can deliver better elections to people in general. So I think thank you so much for this opportunity, and hope this conversation leads to more and more work on elections across the world. I mean, great to hear from both Weena and Talbert on elections in Philippines, and thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, as well. Thank you.
No?
Fred, just to finish, I finished as commissioner at the end of 24, and one of my favourite letters that I kept was a historic letter, a copy of a historic letter from 1927 from a polling official who wrote to the Attorney General complaining that the election had been scheduled when there wasn't a full moon, and he was in a country area and had to ride his horse over a mountain with the polling material. Anyway, when you think about that, you think, that's really interesting, because elections were designed for cities and for a few people, not for the whole. And I think there's a lesson there also about climate as well. We have to think about all the electors, everyone, and how they access that very important vote. And I think that's what we've heard from the panelists today. So it just reminded me of that reminder from 1927. We have to think about everybody. So thank you very much. And thank you, Fran, since I'm the last one speaking, for the way that you've conducted this as well.
Well, thank you, guys. I mean, I appreciate it. I appreciate all your time. I know the attendees, thank you so much. I know we're a little bit over, at least for Australian time. People are even hungry and I'm still Spanish, so I eat late. But anyways, not the rest of the Aussies. I am. Anyways, Saket, Talibar, Yogi that is not here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom and Wina. It's been fantastic. So we appreciate very much. I'm positive that so do the attendees. A lot of you of the attendees, I recognize some names. So hello, and to those that we have not recognized, please don't be strangers. We will organize other events at ERRN. And on behalf also of Sarah and Eric, which Eric, I think he's in Armenia right now, so it was hard for him to be with us today. Well, thanks so much, and yeah, we'll meet you hopefully soon in person or in another event if things go by. All right.
Thank you.
Enjoy your afternoon or the rest of the day, depending on which area you are, guys. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.